This is for Algebra 2, 5B-1, numbers 7 through 9 and 11. And this is complex fractions. Okay, there are more than one way to do this, but I'm going to try to teach us always the same way. Look at your denominators and find a common denominator, which you could see would be 4x. So what you want to do is multiply every fraction by 4x. So notice on this particular complex fraction, I only have two fractions within the one big fraction. Here's a fraction and here's a fraction. I'm going to multiply them both by the common denominator, which is 4x. So I'm going to have 4x over 1, if that helps you see it. And I'm going to multiply this guy by 4x over 1. Because remember, that when you have the same thing over the same thing, it equals 1. So I can multiply that without changing anything. Okay, the reason I do that is because notice these x's will now cancel. So I am only left with 8 because I only have 1 in the bottom and nobody cares about 1 in the denominator. Here my 4x's cancel and I'm only left with x plus 3. So that's that answer right there. How easy is that? Okay. Now some people, you could have done this like this. You could have said 2 over x. And remember when you divide by a fraction, how do you divide by fractions? You multiply by the reciprocal. So notice I'm flipping this upside down. So you could have done it this way, okay? Notice your x's cancel. So you have 2 times 4 is 8, and on the bottom you have an x plus 3. So I mean, that's an option. It only really works if you have one single fraction over one single fraction. So when you get to things like number 9, notice I have 1, 2, 3, 4, because I'm going to end up writing these as fractions here as well. It doesn't work nearly as well. So I'm actually going to do number 9 and then we'll skip back to number 8. So let's do number 9. When I look at my denominators, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 fractions within my complex fraction. My common denominator is a times a minus 1. Okay, you have to include both. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply all 4 of these by a times a minus 1. Okay, so I'm going to squish this in here. Hopefully I can do this. So I'm going to multiply this guy, and I'm going to rewrite this because it's kind of yucky. Okay, here's my 2 over 1. I'm going to multiply him times a minus 1. Whoops, sorry. Here's my 3 over a. I'm having a problem. I should have had Allie hold my phone. And I'm going to multiply him times a minus 1. All over 1. And that's all over, here's my 4 over 1. I'm going to multiply that times a minus 1. Plus, there's my 1 over a minus 1. I'm going to multiply that times a minus 1. Okay, notice I multiplied all of them by the same thing. The common denominator, a times a minus 1. Sometimes things will cancel, sometimes they don't, okay? I'm going to need this so I actually have paper to work on. Nothing cancels here because I only had a 1 in the bottom. So notice I have a 2a times a minus 1. So I'm just going to go ahead and write that right here. I have 2a times a minus 1 minus, here the a's cancel. See that? Love that. So I'm going to have 3 times a minus 1 all over. Notice I don't have fractions up here anymore. Okay, nothing cancels. I only had a 1 on the bottom. So I have 4a times a minus 1. The a minus 1's cancel. Love it. 1 times a is a, so I just have plus a. Okay, now it's just a matter of simplifying. 2a times a is 2a squared. 2a times 1 is 2a. 3 times, that's a negative 3 times a is negative 3a. Be careful here, that's a negative 3 times a negative 1, which is going to be a positive 3. All over, multiply this in, 4a times a, 4a squared. 4a times negative 1, negative 4a plus a. If there's any like terms on the numerator, go ahead and put them together, and I'm going to have 2a squared. Well, negative 2a minus 3a is negative 5a. All over. Negative 4a plus a is what? Let's see here. Negative 3a. I'm looking ahead to see if anything cancels out. Technically, we should see, since this is still squared, if it factors. Are there factors of 6 that add up to -5, I would say yes. Okay, I don't know that things are going to factor, but we should probably go ahead and do that. So let's look at this real quick. Do you guys remember how to factor this? You look for factors of 6 that add up to -5, and I would say this. Notice that multiplies to give me 6, adds up to -5. So do you remember you can write this twice, 2a, 2a. Put your magic pieces on the bottom. Sometimes things will simplify. Notice that these 2's will cancel and go into each other one time. So if I was going to factor this, I'm going to put it down here. I'm going to have a 2a minus 3, 2a minus 3 in one of the parentheses, a minus 1 in the other one. The only thing I can factor out of here is an a. So if I do that, I'm left with 4a minus 3. Okay. I factored, nothing cancels, so this technically would have been okay, but you don't know that things don't cancel if you don't go ahead and factor. So this is actually my preferred answer. This was a yucky problem for sure. Okay, now I'm going to do number 8 actually last. Look at number 11. This one's a lot easier. Here my common denominator is just boring y. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 terms here. I'm going to go ahead and write these as fractions. I'm going to multiply everything by y. So I'm going to multiply this guy by y, this guy by y, and multiply everything by y. What you do to one, you have to do to all, okay? Nothing cancels here, okay, on the diagonal. So I just have y times x, which is xy. Here the y's cancel, love that. So I have minus 5. Here nothing cancels, so I have again y times x, which is xy. Here the y's cancel, so I have plus 4. That's your answer right there. These are not going to cancel because remember when they have a plus or minus sign in between them, this is like a little team and they belong together.